Thank you for joining us for this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Holloway. I have with me today two guests, Attorney Judge W. Leach and Judge Jenifer French. They'll be talking to us today about their judicial campaigns and also about some of the issues that have been going on in the news, in the society, and hopefully we can have a very constructive conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Judge Jennifer French. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Did you say George first or French?
Yes, Judge French.
All right, Judge French.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I'm Judge Jenifer French, and I am a judge in the Franklin County Common Pleas Division. I'm just ending my first term, so I've been there for almost 6 years. I enjoy every minute because I allow almost on a daily basis to make a difference in people's lives and the community that I serve. I am a mother of 3 children, 2 of whom are teenagers, and then a 9-year-old. We've lived in Westerville where we've raised our children. I was previously on Westerville City School, served as vice for 2 years prior to the bench. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, thank you for coming on the show. Mr. Leach?
Thank you. My name is George Leach, and I'm running for the Domestic Relations Court in Common Pleas in Franklin County, and I'm your endorsed Democrat candidate for that seat. I am a father of twin boys. As you can see, that's them in the background on the painting. And a late bloomer in law, so my first half of life was business, the second half of life is law. And I've been practicing for about almost 20 years now in all Franklin County courts, including Court of Appeals and federal court, and in all the counties surrounding Franklin County. So primary focus is in domestic relations court, juvenile justice, and adult and juvenile bindovers from juvenile division to the adult division. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Oh, and thanks for coming on the show. Yeah, this week, a grand jury announced its decision on the Breonna Taylor case. Everyone who's in this country, at least if you're paying attention to the news, you know what has been going on. One officer was indicted, for wanton endangerment, and 2 other officers involved in the shooting were not indicted. So, for those unfamiliar with the case, it's a case about a Black female medical worker who was killed while she was sleeping in an apartment in March of this year when police were trying to execute a no-knock warrant. When officers stormed the apartment, Breonna's boyfriend fired back, thinking that it was a home invasion. So as a result of it, at the end of the day, Breonna was shot several times and she died. So only for the officer to discover announcement of the indictment or the lack of indictment thereof. We've seen a lot of protest, on the street. We've seen a lot of people thinking that maybe they should have done more. A lot of people are unhappy with the decisions, especially people who feel that no justice was served because Breonna is a minority, a Black woman. So my question to either one of you is this, one of you can take this on. How can we as a society stop these kind of senseless killings of Black people in the hands of either law enforcement or vigilantes? Either one of you can take it on first.
Well, I'll answer as far as you may know, I'm a defense attorney. So I've been practicing defense work for 20 years. And so I'm very familiar with no-knocks. I'm very familiar with warrants and probable cause as Judge French is as well. And so I think that, changes in that structure are important. As far as the indictment, as to what the grand jury, we don't know. The information is now coming out as to what was even given to the grand jury to seek an indictment or not get an indictment. So that is, as you know, probably as an attorney yourself, that the grand jury information comes from the state and from the prosecutor's office. And so the information provided is what they presented. So when we find that out, then I think we'll have a lot more answers. I think it's a problem when people are shot in their homes when, and I think some of the facts that we already know that there were no drugs found in this home at the time as well. So And there's lots of different stories of what happened in this case. As a defense attorney, you know, I get the discovery. We look through all those things. We look for systemic racism, you know, in our country in the discovery and the work of law enforcement and state officers, and we advocate those things to judges on the bench to either suppress information or evidence, or to get charges or dismiss charges from the defendant and over into the state. And so there's a lot we don't know yet. Is it a problem across the nation? Absolutely is a problem across the nation. And, you know, although my practice is heavily in the juvenile justice system, it exists there as well. You know, the same kinds of things that we're experiencing in the adult juvenile system, the adult criminal system, exist in the juvenile justice system as well. And it's formed the distrust of those that come into contact with law enforcement and even our courts. And doing defense work for 20 years, that distrust has been articulated to me, and the prejudices that they feel have been articulated to me. And I look for those things when I look into my cases and try to defend them in those cases or get cases dismissed. And it's critical in our country that we change and we listen and we learn from these experiences that we're having right now and move forward on that. And so I believe that in all court systems, not just the felony adult that this case involves, and whether it's an indictment or not. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, I'm here. I think we lost Judge French, though.
We're having some technical issues. Okay. I think we lost her. You know, she's back. So, can you, Judge French, are you still there? He has no audio. Yeah, we're having some technical issues with Judge Jenifer French. Her audio is not connecting. Hopefully, we can still continue to have that conversation with her when her internet is back on. Thank you, George. You know, because you know when we talk about some of these warrants and how they're issued, my question is this: isn't it dangerous in itself to issue a no-knock warrant to a residential apartment, where it is not just dangerous to the officers, even also to civilians, especially in a situation where it's not like you're going to save someone who has been kidnapped?
Well, that is one of the standards is exigent circumstances. Are there existing conditions that they must do a no-knock versus a knock and announce yourself? And so it is critical. It's very important, and those things need to be reworked, because in this case alone, we have shots going into a neighboring apartment, and those individuals could have felt they were under attack by a drive-by shooter or something, and so they could have responded in like form. And what would we have today? We'd be prosecuting them for receiving shots into their apartment. So it definitely is a problem. And you know, and whether this warrant was valid, obviously it's out of our jurisdiction, so I have no indication valid or not valid, or whether it was a no-knock. There's argument that said that they announced before they did a no-knock. You know, that's not a no-knock if you announce. So I don't, you know, we'll learn a lot about it, but those things exist in our own judicial process as well in Ohio. And they are very dangerous, because you have juveniles inside the house, you have children, you have adults, older people. You may have had somebody sleeping downstairs at the time when somebody's knocking. When you come in blazing with, you know, 10 officers or whatever the number is on this particular case, that's a very dangerous situation. If you don't have exigent circumstances, it's probably something we shouldn't do.
Yeah, and I do agree with you, you know, because that's my own issue too with those no-knock warrants. It puts everyone in danger, not just the civilians, even the officers, you know, because I don't believe that we should put inanimate evidence over life.
Right.
regardless. I
Right.
don't care what evidence you're trying to secure, whether it's drugs, whether it's a gun. They shouldn't have value over the lives of the innocent people that should be that should be in where those evidence are.
What would
So I
be
think
what would have been the harm just to wait it out until they leave the apartment? There is no loss of anything. There's not an allegation that there was going to be large quantities of drugs that would be going down the toilet. There is no harm in waiting in this situation so far. What we know, there was no harm in just waiting it out. But
exactly,
that's a decision we didn't
exactly,
make. Law enforcement
exactly.
and prosecutor made.
Yeah, I think Judge French is back. Let's see if we can connect now. Can you hear us?
I can
Welcome
hear.
back,
Can
Judge
you hear
French.
me?
Oh, great. Yes. Yeah, we're still talking about the Breonna Taylor's case, and we're talking about the no-knock warrant and how dangerous it can be, especially in a situation where we're talking about a residential building where civilians' life can be put in danger, as well as the officers. You as a judge, and this also happens in our jurisdiction. A lot of people want answers. You know, I know as a judge, you'll likely say that okay, you can't talk about ongoing cases. This is not in our jurisdiction. Most of the people that wants to vote for you too, they want to know, do you care? How do you feel? Because they want to know these things. So, you as a judge, I don't know if you've ever had to issue one of those. What are those specific requirements that officers must show before no-knock warrants are issued? Wow. Did you get that?
Thank you. I'm sorry, my internet connection is terrible, so I'm going to do the best that I can right now. I'm not really sure what's. But can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes.
I did. Can you hear me? I don't know. Can you guys at least? I'm just going to turn off my camera.
Okay. Yeah, we
can
can hear
me?
you. Yes. Turn off your camera. That's as long as we can hear you.
Okay. Perfect. Maybe with my camera off, that will be better. It's a good question, and I actually have never had the opportunity. Okay, good. In 6 years, almost 6 years, I have not ever signed one of those warrants. I have not had the situation where someone's asking me to do so. So I can tell you exigency is certainly one of the issues. And to be honest, certain facts are coming out, but I really believe in this climate, it is incredibly important for everyone to withhold judgment until we know all of the facts. And at the end of that,
I think, George, I think we may just have to continue this conversation alone. Hopefully, maybe at some time in the future, we'll reschedule Judge French to come back on the show. Then we can have a very constructive conversation without the internet breakup.
Right.
Okay. Yes. Now let's continue. How can we balance the scale of justice to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, is treated equally under the law?
Well, that has lots of problems with that question. There are so many different things that need to be done to give that true balance. We have to put justice must truly be blind to who's in front of them and look at things and look for those biases that are built into the system even when arrests or following somebody down the highway occurs. As if you've done enough cases as I have, and most defense attorneys who've been practicing for 20 years have, you can tell when it is a made-up stop. It may be clear under the law that it was legal, but there is, when you get a stop in a jurisdiction that has a very low level of minorities in that county, and they're the ones that are stopped on a regular basis. It's not hard to figure this stuff out. It's just odd that the officer will say that it's the tail light, it's blinked, the license plate light blinked, and that gave probable cause for a stop. Then the rise to everything smells like burnt marijuana. And there are so many different examples I've had in 20 years of how stops were initiated that just don't sound right as a defense attorney. And my clients tell me, they say, look, if I was a white person, if I was a person of non-color, I wouldn't have been stopped. But they were looking out for me, and they treated me that way from the moment they came to my car. I have had hundreds of those cases. Because as court-appointed attorney, I get those that cannot afford an attorney. So I'm a private attorney on a lot of cases, and I'm a court-appointed on a lot of juvenile cases and adult as well. And so socioeconomic factors come into play as to who gets a court-appointed attorney, who can afford an attorney. And so those are huge in their weight toward minorities and persons of color, that they would have to have a court-appointed attorney. And they're good attorneys, and the public defender's office has good attorneys, but it's hard to convince the client sometimes of that.
Yeah.
So
I know. I do agree with you. And a lot of issues that a lot of Black people, such as this, is this. When we have like videos and things that happen, you can see some of these injustices on camera. You still have, I'm not saying that it's good to rush to judgment, but sometimes I find the statement that we don't have all the facts to defer to, let's talk about it now. And eventually, no matter how much fact comes out, if officers don't wait for fact before killing people, why is it that the victims and those who get hungry over it have to always wait for more information? Isn't that some kind of an imbalance of information or a double standard?
Well, it may be a part of all of that. The best thing that happened in our society so far, and it's growing every day, is cameras and the evidence that is produced by body cams, produced by individuals and citizens recording events. Because think of what it was like before those existed. There was no evidence to get and to defend, the Breonna Taylors of the world and individuals who've been stopped and things that happen. Look, on the internet every day, we're getting examples of captured moments in time of interaction between law enforcement and citizens. And it's by technology that this comes. And a lot of jurisdictions they have body cams available, but sometimes they're working, sometimes they're not turned on. It takes I had a trial where I tried in front of a judge, and it was a matter of the officer forgot to push it. Now, why did he forget to push it? I don't know. It just didn't get pushed. There is no recording. I have no evidence to defend my client as to what he says really happened. And so technology is an amazing thing. It must be done. Officers have to do the job. And, you talked about protections, and there are problems that, jurisdictions, as you're hearing through the news, there are contract negotiations in play that create the disparity between what evidence can be presented and what can happen to officers in jurisdictions. We have that in Columbus. There's the battle between the mayor and police force right now going on as to contract negotiations of the future, because there's already deals made that they can't do certain things to officers involved with incidents. Those are already in. So the citizenry, the defendants and the citizens of Columbus have been denied based on contractual obligations. And so that information, regardless of whether it even comes out, may not have. So there's those factors as well. I think that we're in a change mode in our society right now, and it's coming fast and furious, and it has to happen. And so that answer, I hope that answers partly some of that question about, what do we have? Thank you. And I see Judge French is back, so.
Yes. Yes, you're trying to complete your thoughts from the last time before you went off.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me better now?
Much better. Much better.
So, did you hear any of what I said before?
No.
Okay.
Un poco, a little.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with this. I haven't had a problem, but I certainly am now. But at any rate, what I said was, in 6 years, I have not had any situation where I signed that type of warrant. I haven't had anybody come to me with that. And, you know, obviously when there's an emergent situation, that is when that type of thing would come about. What I was saying is, though, I think it's, you know, not that there aren't times and places for it, certainly, but it's dangerous on both sides. It's dangerous as a whole, because obviously for the person that's in the house is not expecting the police, that's dangerous. You know, I live in Westerville, and we had 2 officers responding to a domestic violence call, and they were both shot dead and, you know, killed, although that defendant, I believe, knew they were the police. But at any rate, it's dangerous for all considered for somebody to be going into a house or apartment or whatever it is, but there are times that it is necessary. And what I was saying is, in this particular case that we've been talking about, I personally believe it's very important in this day and age to withhold judgment until you have all the facts. We do not have all the facts, and I personally am uncomfortable passing any kind of judgment or talking about what else needs to be done before we know exactly what happened. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Even while you were locked up, we're talking about that statement about waiting for all the facts. New facts are coming out, and with each and every fact that is coming out, is pointing to the fact that the way those officers approached the job was done in a way that is reckless, and the way they tried to cover up after the fact, you know, is not, when it comes to the victims, it wasn't fair. But, you know, it is not for us to litigate the case. It's something that happened in another jurisdiction. What we're trying to avoid is, we don't want something like that to happen in our backyard. You know, we don't want to have another Breonna Taylor. But what we can all agree on this show right now is that it is dangerous to everyone involved, both the officers and the civilians. And because when those warrants went out like that, even babies that could be in those buildings will be in danger. Even if they had a 2-year-old or 1-year-old, those will have been in danger. Hopefully, maybe we all learned something from this, that in the future, those warrants will be only issued when situation really, really warranted. Now, when the inanimate evidence, you know, maybe you want to go and rescue somebody, not when you're trying to secure a cocaine. I don't care how many amount of cocaine is worth much more than an innocent life. So that's my own personal opinion. Now, moving on, Judge French, you started your career in California, which is like a huge, you know, compared to Columbus. I know you're from Westerville originally. How was that transition for you, moving from such a big metropolitan back to Westerville, back to coming back home?
Sure. Yes, I did. I actually went to law school for 1 year in Cleveland, Ohio, and then I transferred out to Thomas Jefferson in San Diego, which is a great place to go to law school, and a great place to live. But to be honest, being raised in the Midwest, I very much missed the seasons, and I just missed that Midwest mentality. So I really enjoyed practicing out in California. It's a lot different. I did a lot of construction litigation, things like that, and I really enjoyed it. But it was time to move, and I actually made a stop for about 1.5 years. My husband and I did, in Chicago. So I ended up taking the California bar, the Illinois bar, and then coming back and doing the Ohio bar. So I didn't really practice in Chicago. We frankly weren't there long enough for me to do so, just long enough to take a bar that I'll never use. But at any rate, the adjustment was totally fine. I went into the same kind of work when I started working in Alton, and it's been very helpful to me. I will tell you, it's interesting. In California, at least in San Diego, there are literally two different courthouses. One deals with civil, one deals with criminal. And so it's interesting. It was interesting to come to Columbus and see that judges deal with civil and criminal. And I'm very thankful for that, because my background was in civil litigation, but I worked very hard to get myself caught up on the criminal end after I was elected. So I was elected in the beginning of November, actually, in 2014, and I didn't take it until February. So that gave me the opportunity to shadow a judge that I respected, to see kind of how they dealt with their criminal. And then also I went and visited a number of jails and halfway houses and CCF and Alpha's house and whatnot. So I could just because I feel like you're going to send somebody somewhere or send them to a program or whatever. You know what else. So it was a pretty seamless transition.
Oh, great. And George. Oh, great. Yeah, because I was just wondering how you were able to just, transition from, because it's always, because I remember when I have to move from New York to come to law school in Ohio, I get that question a lot because you have to readjust. And George, you've been practicing criminal defense for about 20 years. How do you plan to transition that into domestic court?
I think it's actually a very good transition. 20 years worth of representing the people that come before the court is absolutely invaluable. I have 20 years experience at talking to parents with abuse, neglect, dependency issues, going to their homes, understanding what really happens in their lives. And you talked about racism and the problems, social, economic, and things like that. So I've got 20 years experience of representing individuals of all races through the process of juvenile justice, custody battles, abuse, neglect, dependency cases, and even some of the the heavy crime stuff, bindovers as well, and divorces and things like that. So as a judge, I would have the recent experience and recent in time to changes that we've had in our community, even the things we're facing today are all my clients. And these things are people, I know what's going on in their lives very well. And it's not something I have put away for 24 years, and now I want change. This is I've been advocating change since I started the job, and I think I bring that with me to the bench. I will bring that with me, and I think I'll represent the community as a whole much better than I could have if I had not had that experience. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And Judge French, almost a similar question. I know you started off being a civil litigator at Lynn Alton Hurst. How was that transition for you when you got on the bench and having to learn how to preside over criminal cases, especially if you've never dealt with that before? What was that like for you?
Sure. Thank you for that question. It's really funny. So when I was screening in 2014 with the Columbus Bar Association, one of the criminal defense lawyers, who I didn't know was a criminal defense lawyer at that time, because I didn't know any criminal defense lawyers at that time, asked me, you're coming from a civil background. How can we know that you're going to be fair to our client? How can we know that you're going to be fair? And I said, quite honestly, I'm a blank slate. So I'm not coming from a criminal defense background. I'm not coming from a prosecutor's background. I'm coming from a civil background, which is a blank slate. And not to say that someone with a prosecutor's background or criminal defense background can't certainly be fair. We have a number of judges on the bench that are all that do that, okay? But it was an interesting question to me. So I worked, like I said, very hard to get up to speed. And like I told you, in California, there's a criminal courthouse and a civil courthouse. And if Ohio was to do that, I would pick the criminal courthouse all day long and twice on Sunday, because that is where, you can do good things in the civil world too, but the criminal cases are where I feel like I make the biggest impact on people. And it's a tremendous responsibility. As George knows, and it's something that I take very seriously, and I enjoy being a huge part of the conversation and trying to get to resolutions that are both, acceptable to a victim, but then also can benefit the defendant to hopefully not reoffend. And so I really enjoy the hands-on aspect of that, and I really think that those are the cases where you make the impact on the community.
Thank you. And George, you've done a lot of abuse and neglect and dependency cases because these are cases that can be super very emotional because those are the kind of cases I've handled before. And with the court you're running for, we are going to be dealing with a lot of people that don't want to be there because when you're talking about family law cases, most of those litigants don't want to be there. How do you how was your life experience, both professionally and personally? How are you going to apply that to dealing with some of these litigants? Because when you are a judge on that floor, your mentality is different from every other courtroom. So, can you tell the audience what are some of those experiences that you're bringing to that court?
Abuse, neglect, dependency cases, and actually all of the domestic relations work is the most important part of a family. It's family court. It's the crisis court. You're not coming there because things are usually happy. You're coming there with problems. Either you're breaking up a family in a divorce or dissolution, or your child is in trouble, or your family's in a crisis situation where you didn't pay the rent, or you lost your job and you now have a dependency, or somebody has abused your child. So it is the most emotional court that exists, I think, as a family. And its overriding goal is still to reunite families. At the end of the day, the domestic relations court, even I believe, even more than adult criminal justice system, truly has the goal of reuniting families and also rehabilitation of youthful offenders. Because our ultimate goal, and I know that with the change of Marcy's law, it has added a level of complications with our cases as well. Not that I don't believe in victims' rights, it's just that we are slowed down in dealing with juvenile rehabilitation and reunification. And so it is a court that I've been in there so long and working so hard, and with all these changes, I think as a judge, the judge has to now take a lot more in than we used to. 20 some years ago, we didn't have what we have today. Social, economic disparity has gotten worse. We have more poor people coming into the system, a person of less means than we had 20 years ago when I first started this job. We have more communities, diverse communities, racial-based, ethnic, religion, diversity as far as gender identification, and families. The new family that we have with LGBTQI people. So those are all things that I'm familiar with and I represent right now as private attorney or court-appointed attorney. And these are things that judges constantly have to re-educate themselves to learn to deal with in their community. So I think that I am a great listener when it comes to these issues, and I advocate all of those things. And I've had cases that jurisdictional issues from different states, gender identification cases. We have the empowerment court, which is our it's trafficking type thing. We have a drug court in juvenile, but we're still small. Juvenile court, domestic relations needs to think much larger than that. Every family is diverse, and every family nowadays is unique, and we must get to their culture. We have to get to their religion as part of the formula, and so I would advocate for that more. It isn't just an interpreter for the day. We need to know how the culture works. As I've traveled in the community now as a candidate, that's what I'm hearing most is how do you help my people who understand my religion and my beliefs and where I am in society. And that's what I will bring to the table as well, I believe, that experience.
All right. Thank you. Judge French, your versatility, I think it's quite impressive from Westerville to California to Chicago and back to Ohio. And then when you're in Westerville, you are part of the city council, and then you moved on to be the deputy mayor. So why did you decide to transition from being part of the executive branch of, or is it the city council? Is it a legislative branch of a city to the judiciary?
Yeah, it's legislative.
Yeah.
It's legislative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What prompted that transition?
Sure. Sure, thank you. I really enjoyed my time on Westerville City Council. I enjoyed local government because you can effectuate change very quickly, much more quickly than you can at the State House, right? So it was a great experience, and I feel like there was a lot of great work done. There continues to be a lot of great work done. I just, you know, I'm a lawyer, and I wanted to be a judge because I felt like I could help more people, broaden the scope, broaden the brush of the lives that I could positively impact. And, you know, so that's what I did. And I haven't regretted that. I miss being on city council, but I'll tell you, and George touched on it, but during my first campaign in 2014, you know, I grew up in Westerville, I lived in Westerville. I definitely needed to get out and branch out. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, is going out to the different parts of Franklin County. And Franklin County is large. Ask anybody who's ever ran a campaign in Franklin County. It's a big place with lots of different people and lots of different communities and lots of different religions and lots of different everything. And so it was a really, really good experience to go out and to do that, and all the different candidates nights. And because you really do have to have your thumb on the pulse of people. You know, we have lots of different people coming in our courthouse every day. And it's important that I know, you know, I mean, certain instances of, okay, well, this is what their religion believes. And, you know, that really can play a part in cases, what the outcome is, why it happened in the first place, you know, things like that. So it was very educational. And frankly, I missed it this year because, you know, we can't go out and shake hands and talk to people. So it's been a little bit more limiting. But I will also say, between 2014 and now, I haven't been sitting in my office eating bonbons. You know, we are going out. I'm always out to different churches and different groups and meeting with different people because I think things change over 6 years. So it's important to constantly keep your thumb on the pulse of the different people in the community because I serve them all.
Thank you. You know, yeah, it's always commendable trying to get to know the community you serve, because otherwise you'll be serving them blindly. Now, okay, I'm gonna ask either one of you, you know, because when your internet was off, I asked Judge the question, how can we maintain a kind of balance? I think you kind of touched on it, but I'm still gonna ask you directly. I'm talking to Judge French now. How do we maintain a balance where we want to ensure that everyone is treated equally, you know, when they come into your courtroom, regardless? I know you've been doing this for years now. Maybe you can just share with us how you do it to make sure that no one is treated differently because of their race, sexual orientation, or sex, or what have you, that everyone is equal when they come to your courtroom.
Sure. I think that is certainly, above all, probably the most important thing that I can do as a judge. And I think it starts with, I believe everybody is equal. So it's not a hurdle I have to get over every day because it doesn't matter who you are when you come in front of me. I believe, as everyone I think should, that everyone is equal. But it's not always what I believe. It's what the person in front of me thinks I believe. And so I go out of my way I run a very calm, frankly, probably sometimes maybe a little too casual courtroom, but I do it on purpose because I want people to be at ease. I'm 5'2". I don't think I've ever been accused of being intimidating, but when you put on that black robe, you're intimidating. And it took me a minute to figure that out because I know who I am and I'm not scary, but the people, you know, on the other side, to them I am. And so I'll call people by their first names. I talk directly to the defendants and to victims a lot of times. And I'll say to them, you know, like, for example, I'll ask somebody, okay, listen, I'm going to sentence you today. I'm telling you right now, I'm sentencing you to probation, but I need to know what your problems are so that I can address it. If you took a drug test right now, what would you test positive for? You know, they know they're not going to go to prison. I want an honest answer. I want to be part of the solution, and I try very hard to do that. And if you are up there gavel beating and intimidating, nobody wants to tell you anything because they're all afraid they're going to go to prison. So, you know, and I think it's funny. I had an attorney that I respect, an African-American attorney that I respect very much, that came in the other day, and I asked him what case he was on, and he said, I'm not on a case, I just want to talk to you. And he sat down and he said, I just want to tell you that you are, and you're not alone, there are a number of judges on this bench that I feel this way about, but I never have to worry about what race I am, what race my client is when I come into your courtroom. That's how every courtroom should be. It just shouldn't matter. And until we get there, we have to have these conversations, and we need to work on it, because, you know, it just, I have, you know, a lot of friends of different backgrounds and different races. And, you know, when I hear that somebody's getting pulled over, or somebody, you know, is getting, you know, somebody that's lived in Westfield forever, and, you know, or wherever they've lived, it's not acceptable. So in my courtroom, everyone is treated equally, and that's how it needs to be in every courtroom.
Thank you. George, this question is for you. You know, what do you have to offer on the domestic court bench that is different from what the incumbent has been offering for the past 24 years? Because your opponent has been on the bench for 24 years. So what is it you're bringing to the table that is much different from what she has brought?
I think the largest, and we've touched on it on a couple of answers already, is the active experience with change. You know, I've lived the change that my clients have lived, and you know, I have my family is diverse. We'll say my partner we are a same-sex family, and we have twin boys, and so I immediately come in with an understanding of a whole culture that maybe my opponent doesn't have. I don't know. But it's that active training every day I get. I am taught by my clients every single day I go out, and I'm taught, you know, for one example, I know in many cases, and I'm not going to be specific to which courtroom, but sometimes in domestic court, the divorce lawyers or some of the lawyers a lot of stuff goes back to chambers, goes back to outside of their view, outside of the client's view. And when you have a disenfranchised community, as many of my clients are, they are very suspicious of things like that. And so when things leave the courtroom too much, it causes insecurity on their part. And so I think one of the biggest changes, you're going to see a lot more participation in front of everybody as opposed to in chambers. And because many times, and I've been a part of these conversations, I know how, because when judges conduct their courtroom, you follow those rules. And so I've been a part of going into the back, coming out with, okay, here's what we're going to do. When I just eliminated my whole client's perspective, and you know, they feel and then I try to explain to them what might be, why my thinking is to go along with this. But it still causes this uneasiness between you and your client and the court and the judicial process, because they just don't feel like they're a part of it. And that's one of the biggest complaints I've had in 20 years, is that they believe there's too much off the record. And as innocent as it is, there may have been nothing in the back room except for getting away from other listeners in the front in many cases, especially in the juvenile delinquency cases where we have bindovers and they're open to the public. So you may have co-defendants or friends and relatives hanging around out in the courtroom, but that little bit causes disruption and uneasiness in my client and their family a lot of times that I then deal with. And so I think that there has to be some change there to truly be an inclusive courtroom. You know, as I said earlier, for the translator, we have translators only at court. And so it takes them out of that again, that all negotiations then are in the back, and then I come back and translate it with the client. And it's that process. They want to hear the judge speak. They want to hear the judge's views in person. They want to know that they're a part of it. And that's the biggest thing I'll bring to the bench as well, because I've done that privately and court appointed, and I know how it works. And I think that's a big change. And that it relays to rest part of what people today, a lot of my clients believe, the systemic racism. They don't know what's going on back there. Why not just eliminate it? Why not eliminate that question that there's something wrong going on? Let's make it clear there's not. And I think we have to go above and beyond to do that right now in our communities and our practices as judges and as lawyers. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a comment about what the point you just made. It says participation in front of everybody. I never thought about how that can affect a disenfranchised group. That's a great point. Now, law and order has been politicized, which makes some judges to be tougher on criminal defendants. And the people who suffer more when law and order is politicized are Black and brown people. You know, knowing that both of you will be dealing with criminal cases, you with bindovers and Judge French, you know, is just, you know, you deal with criminal and civil cases. How do you plan, or how do you balance this conflict to be just with the politics of law and order?
Well, you know, I'll tell you, justice has different definitions, right? So I think 20 years ago, justice was everybody goes to prison. That's not how I see justice. My goal on the bench is to protect the public and to have people rehabilitated to the best ability that I have. So for nonviolent offenders, for example, drug cases, things that come out of drug cases like possession of criminal tools or receiving stolen property, I bend over backwards to try to get people into programming, into treatment, and I work very closely with the probation officers, which I don't think that they were accustomed to before I took the bench, but it's something I definitely do. I talk to them about, okay, what's going to work here? Okay, this person is, you know, if I put somebody on probation and then they have a dirty urine screen, I don't send them to prison. You know, it's a question of, okay, well, what's next? I will tell you, one of the biggest challenges I have had as a judge is sentencing. And it was incredibly difficult for me to send people to prison, even people that clearly had to go to prison, you know, murders, things like that. It was difficult, and it's still difficult. And I have decided that the day it's not difficult is the day that I no longer ask for people's support, because it should always be difficult. That is a very, very big decision. You are taking somebody's freedom. I take it very, very seriously. So, you know, law and order is important. We have to keep people safe. We can't leave murderers and rapists on the street, okay? But I really believe that rehabilitation is possible in a vast majority of people. I'm big on judicial release. If somebody has to go to prison for some amount of time, I want them to do what they need to do and then come back out and, you know, let's try some probation now. So I do my very best to avoid sending people to prison. They do not absolutely have to go. And the whole goal is to make the community stronger, right? So if you take somebody with 3 kids who has, you know, 4 drug possession charges and send them to prison, what happens to their 3 kids? And yes, it's not great for the 3 kids to be around somebody that has 4 drug possessions, possibly, but that's where you go to rehabilitation and programming. So I'm very big on that, and I work very hard to try to get people back into their lives, living and working. I'm very big on work. Please work. I try to get misdemeanors when possible, which is what I mean. I'm very active in the negotiations on a case when I can be, because what does a felony do? If somebody doesn't have a felony and then all of a sudden they have a felony, well, guess where they're working? You know, so it puts up barriers. I care very much about collateral sentences, things that I'm not saying you're sentenced to, but let's be honest, you are, because you can't get a job because of that kind of thing, or you can't buy a house, so you can't rent an apartment. So I try to work very hard to think of all those things, because sentencing somebody and looking strong on crime or hard on crime, that's never my goal.
Thank you. George?
Thank you. This it's a great question. Law and order is, I would look at it more of a function of law enforcement and legislature. Legislature passes laws, and the police and the state keeps the order. In our situation, in mine, especially in domestic, and I practice in felony court as well, so I do adult cases and juvenile cases as well, delinquency. It's the philosophy many years ago, as the judge already mentioned, 20 years ago, it was more of a, I would believe it, more of a crime and punishment. And so the punishment must equal the crime and things like that. It's different in adult court and juvenile court, in domestic relations court. If I can just focus on the juvenile part for that for a minute, because what our goal really is, get this juvenile to not re-offend because he's a juvenile. Mentally, he's different than what we're dealing with on the adult side. He looks at the world, he or she looks at the world differently from the moment they're involved with anything to when they're in front of the court. And so I think that it's certainly not crime and punishment. I do not believe juvenile justice is about crime and punishment. It is, as the judge said, it's more services need to be in place. And we're fortunate in domestic relations court when a family is in trouble in domestic relations court, and if their parents are in municipal court often or in felony court at the same time, we have children's services, Franklin County Children's Services, or service-oriented industry, and they're helping us with these cases, and they're telling us what's going on in the felony side, the misdemeanor side, and we can craft resolutions. Even though we have a juvenile who's an offender, the family's got issues maybe, and we craft resolutions to incorporate all of that. Because the overriding goal, as I said in the very beginning of this session, is that we believe in family reunification, and that has to be our primary focus always. And we believe juveniles need to be juveniles. And so we have this tool called bindovers, and for the most serious of offenders. And I actually specialize in that area because when the Ohio Public Defender's Office changed the qualifications, they knocked off most of the lawyers on the list because they didn't have the high-level offense qualification jury trials in adult court. So I became about 4 people that did these bindovers. And that philosophy changed as well, because now we carry the case from juvenile justice over to adult justice. And it allows for a smooth transition and proper representation. The whole goal of the Ohio Public Defender's Office was to give juveniles qualified attorneys at that level, because that's the most serious of offenses. So I do not believe in crime and punishment is a function of the court. It is more a function of how do we not get here again? How do we keep this family united? How do we keep those juveniles juveniles? We need to get a juvenile at some point to realize he's still a kid and he shouldn't be doing adult things, whether they're crimes or in his behaviors or her behaviors, whichever it is. So I like the judge's response. I agree 100% that it is about services. We're fortunate in domestic relations court, we have a lot of services available, but it's the marrying of the courts that we need to do more of. We need to join up with felony court because the parents are there. We need to join up misdemeanor court because the parents are there, because you can't fix a juvenile when mom and dad is setting an example. We have to have the whole family fix, and we have to work services together. So that is a goal, I believe, as a defense attorney. I'm wrapped up all those courts. And I try to advocate for services in all those courts because I know what's going on with the kids as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge French, I need to read this comment to you. It says, bringing humanity to the bench. Justice French, thank you. And there's also a comment for you, George. You said, yes, family reunification and rehabilitation, especially for juveniles. Yes. Wow. Speak, George. Yeah. So before we round up, I'm going to ask both of you to tell the people who are listening out there, what are those personal and professional qualities that you have that you want people to consider when they look at that ballot and decide who to vote for?
Okay, thank you. George, I don't mean to step in front of you every time. I don't know. Anyway, I truly, first of all, I have experience, but you know what? A lot of bad judges have experience. I don't think it's about a number of years, but personally, I have compassion. I have common sense. And I think being able to think outside of the box to find different solutions is important. I think one of the most important things a judge can have is a lack of ego, because if you're on the bench and I don't think there's any room for ego in this job. If I'm wrong, I'm going to tell you I'm wrong. If I make a mistake, I'm going to tell you I made a mistake. If I don't know sometimes I don't know what to do. Sometimes on a sentence or, something else, I just don't know what the right answer is. So I do talk to the lawyers a lot. Talk to me about this, or someone will say, okay, Judge, I know that, you were going to revoke this person's community control, but what if I can look at this program, after I've already said, this isn't what I'm going to do. I'm flexible. So I think the lack of ego is very, very, very important. You have to be able to change your mind. There's a lot of times I'm on the bench and I know what I'm going to do. And then I listen to the defendant and I think, well, wait a minute. Okay, maybe there's a better option, or, maybe we can go a different route, or wait, he said this and that's what probation told me, and guess what, he's right, So I think that all of those things, and just being a person who likes people and who has other people's best interest in mind, I think those are all good qualities for a judge and qualities that I possess. Thank you for having me today, and thanks everyone for your consideration.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Okay. Well, I'm not your traditional lawyer even, and certainly not your traditional candidate. Law came to me late in life, so I did a lot of other stuff. I was in the private sector as a purchasing agent and manager of a large retail chain of stores. And so I know people really well, and I'm a great salesman as well, and in tennis shoes and things like that. But I also have a teaching certification. So I've taught elementary school in Westerville and full-time in Columbus here. And so I understand children. I absolutely love to teach children. As you see the painting behind me, I teach children I have an art gallery in town that is closed for now during the campaign, but afterwards it'll come back. But so where I taught children how to paint, I teach children and adults. I've had many adults in there as well. And so I'm approachable certainly at all levels, and I'm diverse in my personal life and my social life and those I surround myself with, because sometimes you are what you surround yourself with. And so if you live in a box, you'll be a very boxy person, and you'll only know the person in the box. But so I'm outside the box, clearly, as Judge French stated. You must be outside the box in your thinking, and you have to think like the person in front of you. You have to understand them. And I'll go back to one more juvenile example, is that when a juvenile talks to me about their case and what really happened in a case, but I know, and in fact, of a bind-over case, one of the first steps is a probable cause hearing. So we have to determine whether probable cause existed. When juveniles think of these things, they think that if they just say what it happened, then everybody's just going to believe it, and that's going to be the answer. I just need to tell people what really happened. And that's the beauty of being a juvenile, that they do believe that makes a difference, because it should, and it should be considered. But far too many times lawyers, and I've traveled all counties, and I've seen the worst of judges, and I've seen exceptional judges. I've seen the worst of attorneys and exceptional attorneys. And so I've got great experience of observing a lot of different atmospheres and courtrooms, and I bring all that with me. And so that's the diversity I bring to the bench will be those years of experience of getting out there and doing this for 20 years. And I have many of my clients are no longer with us because they couldn't change their path, or they were part of gangs that had a negative outcome. And I've at all levels of cases. And so I am very compassionate of their lives and their experiences in the court system. And I will make that a better experience. They will understand the process a lot better than my clients do today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming on this show. You really made this one hard to be. We've had a very lively conversation. Hopefully I get to talk to you again in the future, and hopefully you get to come back to Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Olawale.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Democracy is not about maintaining power at all cost, abandoning principles, or breaking the other party's spirit, making up new rules as you go to suit your agenda at the expense of the country, and without consistent application of the rule of law. We all own this country. We all live in this country. If you make the country unlivable for others because of rigid policies that exclude others, you're building a fractured center, which will inevitably collapse. Democracy dies when it is swindled, when facts become expendable, when justice becomes a fiction, and we take on issues with reckless disregard for truth. People will lose faith and lose pride in the country that they love. Our democracy is currently under assault. We must defend it if we love this country. We must defend it if we call ourselves patriots. We must fight for it if we want this country to exist. You must vote and exercise your right if you don't want our democracy to become history. That is it on Legal Angle with Emmanuel De La Holloway. Until next time, stay safe and stay blessed.